just going to read this IM because I saw this and it's a bit critical of our coverage. I just want to address it. Andy Tal says, I am Jewish and have family in Israel, some of whom died in the attacks and others who have now been enlisted. I'm so sorry to hear that. That is horrible. I've always been supportive of Palestinian rights and hope they have a peaceful land of their own. That being said, MR's coverage has been very disappointing. This attack was Hamas terrorism, full stop. Your coverage seems to excuse this and acts as this is natural repercussions for what I agree have been dehumanizing treatment from the Israeli government. Should I bomb the DNC for blocking healthcare for all? Should we execute people in GOP countries on behalf of the dead Iraqis because they voted for Bush? Counties, I think. Did I say that? GOP counties? Yeah, I mean, no, you should not do that. And I do not excuse what Hamas did. It is an act of what we have defined as terrorism, which is an attack on civilians when they are defenseless, when they're at a music festival. It is horrific violence. There's no way to defend it, and I never would do so. But what I think I'm trying to provide and what we're trying to do here is to give some context as to why a group like Hamas may be empowered, putting aside the history of Israel basically saying we'd rather have Hamas and empowering them in the past.
They're part of our strategy.
A part of their strategy because they felt more threatened by the nationalist parties and the PLO than they did Hamas, which is, by the way, straight out of the United States' playbook of empowering religious fundamentalists in places like Afghanistan because they would rather partner with those groups than the other ones. That is important context, and the overarching point here is that violence of this kind and violence against Israelis is inevitable with the rolling systemic violence of apartheid and killing of Palestinians. That is what happens when you create a structure and structure your society in a way where there's a music festival happening on 3 miles away from the fence where 2.4 million people are living in an open air prison. 90% of the Palestinian population doesn't have clean water. The median age is 19 years old. Half the population are children, and there's a group of young people that have no purpose, have no economic opportunity, have no ability to actualize their lives. There will be extremism that crops up. The bigotry that results from that, the anti-Semitism that results from that, that is the problem of the structure. And we're trying to be clear that the power lies basically entirely with Israel. It's backed by the biggest, most powerful country in the world, the United States, unequivocally. It's backed by other nations like the United Kingdom, a majority of nations in the European Union. Essentially, the entire Northern Hemisphere backs Israel. And Palestine is one of the poorest places on the planet. Yeah. So, of course, extremism comes out of those conditions. Of course it does. And that is why the blame falls on the more powerful actor in this instance, and that is Israel. And so I am heartbroken that your family passed away in these attacks and were killed by Hamas. That is, I can't imagine that grief. I really can't. And it also contextualizes that this is the grief that Palestinians go through all the time. And I'm sure you know that. You've said that you believe that Palestinians should have rights and all of that, and that is a good position. I understand. So I hope that you don't think that I am saying that these attacks were in any way justified. That is the opposite of what I'm saying. But I'm just giving the context of why, because we talk about politics from a systemic perspective, why these conditions may have been enabled.
It's an active political question, and you can't just say, like, this stops at Hamas, full stop, and you have to do what Haaretz is saying, which is the disaster that befell Israel on the holiday of Simchat Torah is the clear responsibility of one person, Benjamin Netanyahu. The prime minister has prided himself on his vast political experience and irreplaceable wisdom in security matters, completely failed to identify the dangers he's constantly leading Israel to when establishing a movement of annexation and dispossession. That, you cannot talk about this in absence of that, and that's not history, that's just the active situation. And So like all these atrocities, which they absolutely should be documented, and we absolutely should move toward justice for them, but we can't move towards justice when there's still an active occupation. And like there should be a ceasefire. Auchincloss saying no, we can't do a ceasefire. That's absolutely no. We need to stop. We need to start negotiating for hostages and bring people back safe, and then move out of these conditions that produce this sort of thing. Because like, yes, like people should be able to go to a music festival and not be killed and slaughtered. Absolutely they should. But like, can you just do, like, should they be able to do one in the shadow of a giant prison of millions of people? Like, that's not a just world either. Like, and this is this situation that has been set up by and so like you can't, unity with Israel is tough, because are you unifying with Benjamin Netanyahu? No, you can't. You cannot just show naked unity, because there's an active plan right now to massively retaliate, including collective punishment, that is going to affect all sorts of lives of people who are not active militants. And like that's what's going on right now. Like that's what's happening. Like that's the person who needs to hear that violence isn't the answer, is the people who are like sending fighter jets to blow up buildings or missiles to blow up buildings. Like that's where we need to get to. And I understand like people close to the situation, and even like, or know people, like, yeah, it is horrible. And I think it is gross that people like, just celebrate like, because so-called like settlers, right? But fundamentally, people were put in and told to annex and occupy different places by a government that was not actually able to protect them. And that's fundamentally where the doorstep that this needs to be put on now. And that's why it's not satisfactory to me to just say, well, Hamas is bad, as like there's collective punishment and bombings that are like just wiping out neighborhoods of people right now.
I think that the Siamer should listen to Hagai Matar was on Democracy Now! This morning, who was a conscientious objector and spent, I believe, a year or two in jail because he refused to enter into the military and participate in the system of apartheid, putting that very situation in context of how horrible it is for Israelis to be going through this collective trauma at this very moment, but how that this is a quotidian occurrence for Palestinians. And the music festival moment, I'm horrified for the young people who were there just having a good time and who were killed. But the systemic kind of symbol of a music festival 3 miles away from these starving people. I mean, I'm kind of reiterating what we said earlier, but that says everything, does it not? One, that the population in Israel was able at that period to have that to go and experience joy that was disgustingly cut short by Hamas. But while on the other side of the fence, there are human beings like dying of thirst.
And the I can't remember what the Orthodox type of Jews that say like Israel's never going to be safe, but they're right. You cannot be safe in that sort of situation. Like it's not. And like what does that mean to be secure? Does it mean moving them out of the Gaza Strip and West Bank? Egypt, you want them? Because that is actually like consider a consideration, and that's on the table now. So like people ask like what the solution is. Like the solution is at least like what Haaretz is saying, a reversal of these sorts of aggressively sort of expansionist policies and yeah, I mean that
nothing does more to undermine the security of Israel than the subjugation of Palestinians and Netanyahu.
They literally empowered Hamas. Like I don't know how clear of a circle we need to draw on this. And like
Should I read this quote again?
Yeah,
I'm going to read this quote again, just for people in the back here. This is from Netanyahu meeting with the Likud party's Knesset members in March 2019. Anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state has to support bolstering Hamas and transferring money to Hamas. This is part of our strategy to isolate the Palestinians in Gaza from the Palestinians in the West Bank.
I mean, this is from Wall Street Journal, 2009. Hamas, to my great regret, is Israel's creation, says Mr. Cohen, a Tunisian-born Jew who worked in Gaza for more than 2 decades. Responsible for religious affairs in the region until 1994, Mr. Cohen watched the Islamist movement take shape, muscle aside secular Palestinian rivals, and then morph into what is today Hamas, a militant group that is sworn to Israel's destruction. Instead of trying to curb Gaza's Islamists from the outset, says Mr. Cohen, Israel for years tolerated and in some cases encouraged them as a counterweight to the secular nationalists of the Palestinian Liberation Organization and its dominant faction, Yasser Arafat's Fatah. And so it's again, like, this is important to understand the people who are, whose lives have been ruined on both sides of the fence, is that the responsibility lies in the Israeli government.
Yep. You mentioned it, but you can read an article, Mehdi Hassan in The Intercept from 2018 goes into this in great detail about the empowerment of Hamas as well. Says this isn't a conspiracy theory. Listen to former Israeli officials such as General Yitzhak Segev, who was the Israeli military governor in Gaza in the early 1980s. Segev later told a New York Times reporter that he had helped finance the Palestinian Islamist movement as a, quote, counterweight to the secularists and leftists of the Palestine Liberation Organization and the Fatah party led by Yasser Arafat, who himself referred to Hamas as, quote, a creature of Israel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, like, the other thing is why do we talk about a 2-state solution and not a 1-state solution? It's because of demographics. It's because of voting demographics. And if you fully enfranchise those people politically, then it wouldn't be a Jewish state. And so, like, that's really the deal. And so instead, we have a security concern that is leading to, enclosing a couple million people in the densest part of the world and then blowing up buildings inside it.
I hope that response answers some questions.
Like, it absolutely is horrible, and it is time for a reckoning. But the reckoning needs to not just be aimed at Hamas, because ultimately it's part of a larger structure that Israel has helped to set.
Yep. Tommy from Israel writes in, people like me on the already small Israeli left, actual anti-occupation left, constantly risk our well-being protesting the occupation, getting beat up by police and fascists whenever we protest against Israel bombing in Gaza and murdering Palestinians. And then when our families and friends get butchered by Hamas, our supposed comrades abroad tell us this is what decolonization looks like. That's not what we're saying.
Certainly not what we're saying.
Certainly not. But good on you for keeping up the fight. Calling from an 818 area code. Who's this? Where you calling from?
Hey guys, Dave from Jamaica.
Hey Dave, a little bit of echo on your end, but thanks for calling.
Yeah.
Better.
I guess to focus on the topic at hand, though. I've been seeing stuff that has been disturbing me, that the main focus should always be the Israeli government, because they are the ones who have created the situation that we're seeing now. And I'm imploring, and this is even from people I respect online, to stop using this as a time to grind your axe against X or Y leftists you don't like because they're not saying what you think they need to be saying, because that is a distraction. Those folks have no control over how the Israeli government responds or whatnot, and the focus should be on the Israeli government. So finding Bernie bros you don't like or whatnot is utter, complete, useless waste of time, right? They have zero impact on the policy decisions of the Israeli government. They're not on the Western powers that support the Israeli government. And bemoaning the state of the left or whatever nonsense people are on is frankly annoying and stupid. And I'll keep it short today because I don't want to say something that will... Yeah, I don't want to say something.
You don't want to go too far. I understand. And this is the kind of news story where you have to reel yourself back in. I mean, I'm doing that consciously because you can just fall just deep into doom and despair and anger. But I agree with you. I mean, that should not be the focus.
Also, be on the lookout. While I'm going to assume sincerity on the previous IMs, I have been seeing very concentrated efforts by certain folks, probably APAC funded, who knows, who are posing in various left media spaces, sowing those type of questions. Do you support, the killing of Jews or stuff like that? So be on the lookout for that type of stuff, because I've seen similar, not doubting the sincerity of the IM, but I've seen similar questions posted on all sorts of left media sources, to the point where I am suspicious. And also be wary, there's a lot of misinformation going on.
Yep. There was an article in Wired about just how much this new Twitter, under Elon Musk is responsible for spreading misinformation. I mean, he's responding to like anti-war accounts that are tweeting out deeply like anti-Semitic stuff and things like that. It's a total mess. And it's fog of war, but amplified given the fact that our major platform for sharing information has been sabotaged by a pro-apartheid billionaire. So
exactly, and I think what also it reminds me is that there was a peace march that the Palestinians have done many years ago, but at the time, most of Western media was reporting it like a riot, where the ones where I think it was in Abby Martin's documentary where they were sniping children, and then they had the evidence of the sniper recording his own war crimes and cheering about it. So and at the time, people were reporting that as if there was Palestinians were doing a riot. So people have to be careful, and they have to wait for the information to come out, if it ever does, before we take various things at face value about.
Absolutely.
Like there's one going on about babies being beheaded, and I don't buy that for 1 second. So
I mean, who knows? But the point is, like, broadly speaking, whatever. My opinion is, like, the atrocities that do happen are one, like, yes, we should prosecute people under like non-occupation settings for war crimes that they do commit. But generally speaking, like, it's also on the doorstep of the Israeli government for leading these conditions and expecting this to be a safe situation for people to live in. So again, I don't think it's worthwhile being too definitive about certain claims at this point, but I don't think the claims change the fundamental setting here.
No, that's correct, Matt. You're correct. Thank you for that.
Yep. Thank you, Dave.
Yeah.
Always appreciate hearing from you.
All right, guys. Take care.
Take care. Daddy's Fat Axe says, F that I am. You guys at MR are covering this war as good as we can. Do people think Hamas just woke up and decided to attack like it's a singular incident? We have to recognize the historical context of Gaza to understand the whole picture. Appreciate that. Midwest Career, the MR crew isn't giving excuses. They're giving explanations. Terrorism isn't defensible, but it is explainable. Space Case, I find all the Israel-Palestine analogies confuse the issue more than they elucidate. No one is pro-innocent deaths. Creating an analogy about 9/11 or native genocide or whatever is not good criticism of the pro-Palestine position or the pro-Israel position. Just make the point you want to make and leave the debate analogies for when the crisis has subsided. I'm actually not even making I think that the native American example is not completely confined to this current crisis. It's more about the system of apartheid previously, so I feel more comfortable making that claim, but generally I agree with what you had to say there. Eric from Michigan. Hey, Matt.
Sorry, can I just make one point on the 9/11 thing? Like, again, like, it is insane to me that Jake Auchincloss says no one told us to de-escalate after 9/11. We can't tell Israel to. No, that's exactly the lesson from 9/11 if we're going to draw one and invoke
it. Left did.
Yeah.
Barbara Lee,
Well, one person.
But I mean,
yeah, and the protests, of course. Yeah.
Yes, and the protests.
Yeah, the same people exactly calling for it now.
I mean, who's saying that? Who's saying that we should respond that in some way, there's like a double standard?
Well, Markey said de-escalate and got booed at a pro-Israel rally in Massachusetts, and Jake Auchincloss says that's premature. You can't do it now.
Oh, fuck off. Seriously, honestly. I mean, are we really going to put our response to 9/11 up as a model for how we should respond?
People are doing
here?
it. Yep.
We invaded a nation that had nothing to do with the attacks on 9/11. We invaded actually two countries. Afghanistan was the initial invasion, and we occupied Afghanistan for 2 decades and decimated their entire public infrastructure. And then in Iraq, we just massacred people in the streets there for no reason. That's what we should be. That's the model.
Yep.
That I mean, am I hallucinating, or did we kill basically nearly 1 million people in Iraq?
They want what Jake is saying is we want to feel that feeling of we can do the violence now, and you'll accept it. That's it.
All right, let's custodial artist. Emma, I've gotten my father a tattoo appointment. Do you have the blueprints for the correct Fetterman tattoos? And something Lauren Boebert and Beetlejuice left is best. Thank you.
No Fetterman tattoos, please.
Yeah. No, but the joke is the for the body double situation.
Oh, gotcha.
Yes.
Yeah.
Union Jack, 3-year subscriber here, and I'm requesting a kind courtesy disagree openly before I unsubscribe to you. It is absolutely disgusting that you and Matt have indirectly told the concert goers should have known better when going to a concert seeking peace.
That's not what I'm saying. Let me be clear. What I'm saying is the Israeli government shouldn't set the conditions where there's a concert right next to a jail of people. No,
we're saying that's symbolic of the apartheid.
But even then, it's I don't think those people deserved it, and nothing we have said. I defy you to quote us saying that. We're saying that it's horrible that it happened, but ultimately the responsibility is who put the 2 million people in the Gaza Strip, who put that concert there. It's the same organization.
Yeah.
It's the same group. It's the Israeli government, Bibi Netanyahu. That I don't know how we could be clearer.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I think that's a very bad faith interpretation of what we said there.
Oh, wow. Gabe from Philly. I just wanted to call in and give a reading suggestion.
Sure.
I'm a anti-Zionist Jew, and for a long time, I've been reading up on the Jewish Labor Bund's critique of Zionism. The Bund was a Jewish socialist party that was initially founded in Russia, then continued on in Poland. But in 1938, one of the Bundist leaders, Henrik Ehrlich, wrote an essay entitled, Is Zionism a Liberating Democratic Movement? And it's basically a takedown of Zionism from the perspective of Jewish liberation. And I personally found it very useful to read through. And I would also just encourage any Jews listening to this to think about what Jewish liberation outside of Zionism would actually mean, because I don't think it's really discussed in our communities enough anymore. But I'll take myself off air.
Oh, no, thanks. I was going to say, if you had any thoughts on furthering up that, I'd be curious. But if you just want, thanks for the suggestion too.
Yeah.
The one of the Bund's ideas was the concept of national cultural autonomy. So they were working within the early 20th century kind of revolutionary Marxist sphere, so creation of a workers' state, but within that they wanted to have basically a third part of the government specifically for culture that was an elected body of all, or from each ethnic group. So you would have effectively a Jewish parliament whose job was to determine Jewish affairs and Jewish resources. And then within the Russian Empire, or whatever workers' state developed in the Russian Empire, you would have the same for Russian culture. You'd have the same for Ukrainian culture, Polish culture, all of that. And then I don't think it's a perfect idea. I think it could also get very bureaucratic very quickly. But part of the idea was also that you could freely move within any of these like national groups. So if you, but within that, like, no Ukrainian can say what's getting taught in a Yiddish school, for instance. And it was part of the way that they were trying to allow for the flourishing of all of the different ethnicities and cultures while still having everyone work together collectively within the worker state. Because they recognized, and something that did end up happening within the Soviet Union is when you equalize everything and nationalize everything, the hegemonic culture is going to naturally kind of just take over. And that did lead to, like, by 1951, there were no more schools teaching Yiddish within the Soviet Union. And you did see kind of the slow die out of Yiddish culture within Russian Jewry. And that was one of the things that they were trying to avoid while still building a, like, new workers' world.
Interesting.
And as part of that, they were also vehemently anti-Zionist, not only because they recognized it as effectively a reactionary nationalist movement, but also it distracted Jewish workers from fighting for their own liberation wherever they lived. Because especially early on, Zionist rhetoric was saying, like, don't fight for, sorry to interrupt, don't fight for better rights in Russia, just make Aliyah and move to Palestine.
That sounds like a fascinating read. And
yeah, I think like maybe we're in a different place in history with some of this stuff, but I think like those sorts of thoughts, especially like I think like the commitment to freedom of movement and like labor, I think these sorts of things are going to need to be discussed. I mean, that's another, it's not just like voting with like regards to why there's a separation in Israel. It's also like, oh, well, who is Palestinian going to undercut labor and certain things like that. Like I think those are the types of, we do need to be thinking about this, because right now we're at a very scary, horrifying fork in the path.
Yeah.
Appreciate the call.
And one other thing on labor, I think something that doesn't get called out enough is that even prior to 48, the Histadrut, the Israeli or the Jewish labor movement in Palestine, actively excluded Palestinians from being able to join their union, which basically, so while all of this international funding was coming in to support the Jewish settlements, Palestinians were already barred from being able to join that workforce and getting any benefit from that, which really just
contributes
to that.
Yeah. Right.
But anyway, thank you.
Thanks so much for the call. That's a great suggestion. Okay. Maddie Moron, Reactionary Left Radio, just re-released an episode that his co-host for Red Menace, Allison, did call A Brief History of Jewish Anti-Zionism, that gets into the Bund and other Jewish anti-Zionist currents.
Interesting.
Liberation is Costly says, I am a Palestine supporter and how Israel is indiscriminately bombing them is sickening, but how do you feel trading? But that's how people feel when you say Hamas attack is bad quickly and within seconds say, but I miss Michael and his nature of nuance and empathy, but direct messaging. You guys are children left in the classroom when Sam is out of the studio.
Sure.
Future Reactionary, just a word of encouragement to you all on your coverage of Israel-Palestine. It's impossible to please everyone with any one take. I find myself reticent to present opinions for fear of being labeled a pariah because our nation's storied history in support of Israel. I appreciate your courageous, firm stances and hope for a speedy end to the conflict. War is terrible. The current situation is untenable. But as with Russia/Ukraine, if the more powerful player isn't willing to negotiate peace, the probability of it diminishes vastly. Best of luck navigating the cesspool of hot takes we call modern society. Thank you very much. Golden Toad, American Jew here. I just want to let Emma and Matt know that I wholeheartedly agree with your analysis. This weekend has been really eye-opening for revealing who has been paying attention to the atrocity that is Gaza and who has been blissfully ignorant. Of course, we don't support civilian deaths. That's why we've been sounding the alarm on Gaza for years. Israelis who are hurting right now should be able to sympathize with the innocents in Gaza.
Many do.
Who have been experiencing terror and death for decades, collectively punished for their oppressive government's actions. Exactly. I saw an Israeli man, and I don't speak Hebrew, so I can't. I only saw the translation, but essentially on cable news saying that my heart bleeds for the parents in Gaza as well, and that's the exact sentiment here.
Yeah. I mean, the sentiment that needs to be prevailing right now among anybody, regardless how close you are to the situation. Hagar Matar was he from 972 executive director. Michael Seffard is right. He's tweeting out a link to Haaretz piece. Haaretz has been doing just an incredible, amazing journalism that puts a lot of American press to shame, absolute shame. Michael Seffard is right. Even when the blood justifiably boils from the horrors of the massacre in the South, it is forbidden to impose collective punishment on millions of people in the form of deprivation of water, electricity, and food, and bombings, where damage is more important than accuracy, as Doc says. And that's what needs to be said right now. That more than I condemn Hamas full stop. Like, of course I condemn those killings, and I a time machine go back and stop them from happening. But how do you do that? Is it just have better guards, or is it undoing the system that is making these sorts of events happen?
Brandon from Kentucky, not to be semantical, but Bashir is pronounced Bashir. Oh, I'm sorry. Don't worry, it's contagious here, the lack of pronunciation. But I also appreciate your systemic critique of the Israel-Palestine situation. However, I'm still too upset about calls not being taken 2 Thursdays ago, to fully admit it. Tommy from Israel. Hi, just to clarify my previous I am about leftists saying this is what decolonization looks like didn't refer to you. Your words on this matter are very fair. I'm talking about the response from other segments of the left, like Novara Media reporter who celebrated the massacre. Sorry if it came out if I was referring to you. No, I think you made it clear.
No, fair enough. And I do think there is, I'm not denying that there are certain people who are taking a toxic approach to death. I just think it's and I think Eugene Puryear, they talk about the rape thing. At the rally was, I don't think great. Right. And I absolutely disagree with that. I just think focusing on it is a big problem right now with what's actively happening on the military front. Yep. It just cannot be where the conversation goes. But I appreciate and I'm not in disagreement with that.